I'm just doing this for my family and, just standing up for my dad.
That's Karl Malone's son defending his dad, and that's because things aren't looking good for him right now. Word on the street is the basketball legend will finally be going away for a long time over a sexual case from years ago. And you won't believe what recently blew the case wide open again. Let me break it down. The crime that fame couldn't bury forever. Karl is having it rough right now. The basketball legend may end up spending the rest of his life in jail. For many people, that comes as a shock. And that's because the incident at the center of all this dates all the way back to 1983. By 1983, Karl Malone was a 20-year-old sophomore at Louisiana Tech University. He was already beginning to look like the force of nature that would eventually terrorize NBA power forwards for nearly 2 decades. He was big, physical, and driven. And that summer, he was back home in Summerfield, back in the neighborhood where he grew up, around people he had known his whole life. That is where and when he encountered a 13-year-old girl named Gloria Bell. The incident that has defined Karl Malone's off-court legacy occurred in 1983 when he was 20 years old and he impregnated Gloria Bell, a 13-year-old girl from his hometown of Summerfield, Louisiana. She was not a stranger. She was a neighbor, a child from the community, and under the laws of the state of Louisiana, laws that were just as clearly written in 1983 as they are today, misconduct with a minor under the age of 17 constitutes statutory misconduct in Louisiana, a crime that carries a potential prison sentence of up to 10 years. Let that sit for a moment. 10 years in prison for what Karl Malone did to a 13-year-old girl. He has never served a single day. And then came the Pat Bev podcast. Patrick Beverley, NBA veteran, outspoken personality, man who has never been accused of lacking an opinion on anything, heard what Karl Malone did for the first time, in real time, on camera.
But what about his off-the-court stuff? Does that factor in at all?
No, I really don't know a lot of off-the-court horse stuff about Karl.
He got a 13-year-old pregnant.
And then came the pause. One of those pauses that says everything 1,000 words could never capture.
I'm going to go Oscar Robertson and Julius Erving. Dr. J. Timeout? You need a timeout? A 30-second?
No, fool.
Patrick Beverley's reaction wasn't theater. It was the reaction of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth that had been sitting in plain sight for decades, somehow never quite loud enough to reach him. And his first question, his very first instinct, was to make sure he had the facts right. Here is where this story stops being just a scandal and starts being something darker and more systemically disturbing, because this was not a gray area. This was not a he said, she said situation that stumped legal scholars. Gloria Bell gave birth to a son, Demetrius Bell, on May 3, 1984, when Karl Malone was 20 years old. A paternity test would later confirm beyond any doubt that Malone was the father. There was no question of what had happened. There was a baby, there was a teenage mother, and there was a 20-year-old man who had caused both. So why were no criminal charges filed? Why did the legal system, the same system that has no problem locking up young black men for far lesser offenses, simply step aside and let this one go? Bell's family chose not to pursue criminal charges, reportedly to avoid further trauma to Gloria and to shield their daughter from the public scrutiny that a trial would inevitably bring. And that decision, made by a family that was likely overwhelmed, likely pressured, likely operating with limited resources, and even more limited faith in a justice system that had historically not protected people who looked like them, that decision effectively closed the criminal window forever, because the statute of limitations does not wait for anyone to feel ready. 3 years passed. Karl Malone entered the NBA draft in 1985. He was selected 13th overall by the Utah Jazz. He signed his first professional contract. And suddenly, this man from Summerfield, Louisiana, this man who had impregnated a 13-year-old girl 2 years earlier, was a millionaire basketball player. In 1986, Gloria Bell's family filed a civil paternity suit. A blood test confirmed Karl Malone as the father of Demetrius Bell, and a judge ordered him to pay $125 per week in child support, plus medical expenses. $125 per week. That was the number the court assigned as appropriate compensation for the man who had fathered a child with a 13-year-old girl he never should have touched. And Karl Malone, who was now earning an NBA salary that his rookie year alone put at over $800,000, contested that amount as excessive. Read that again. He called $125 a week excessive, while earning nearly $1 million a year. The dispute eventually led to a confidential out-of-court settlement reached between 1988 and 1989. The terms were sealed, the details were buried, and Karl Malone went on to become one of the greatest power forwards in the the history of professional basketball. Meanwhile, Malone denied paternity publicly for years and had minimal involvement in Demetress Bell's life throughout his childhood. Demetress himself has described their relationship during those early years as distant, as if he was, in his own words, the product of his mother having gone to a sperm bank. Karl Malone never went to prison. He never faced criminal charges. He never had to look at a jury. He built a dynasty in Utah, 2 MVP awards, 14 All-Star selections, a spot on the 1992 Dream Team, and eventually enshrinement in the Basketball Hall of Fame. The system that should have stopped him in 1983 blinked, and basketball rewarded him for the next 20 years. But the internet doesn't blink, and the reckoning that the courts refused to deliver, well, that is a different kind of sentence entirely. Now let's talk about what happened when the world started paying attention, about the NBA's role in all of this, about the backlash that has followed Karl Malone from Salt Lake City to social media and back, and about one young NBA superstar who, on his own birthday, decided he'd seen enough. The NBA's dirty secret. Let us be clear about something before we go any further. Karl Malone's basketball career was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. He ranks 3rd on the NBA's all-time scoring list with 36,928 points. He won 2 MVP awards in 1997 and 1999. He was selected to the All-Star Game 14 times. He holds NBA records for most free throws made and most free throws attempted. He played 19 seasons, primarily with the Utah Jazz, alongside point guard John Stockton, and together they formed one of the most unstoppable offensive partnerships the league has ever seen. His career was not just good, it was historically good, and that is precisely why the conversation around his off-court crimes is so difficult and so necessary, because greatness on a basketball court has never, and should never, serve as a pardon for crimes committed off it. Of course, the most commonly told story about Karl Malone's legacy, before recent years brought the darker one to the surface, was about championships, or rather, the lack of them. Despite 2 appearances in the NBA Finals in 1997 and 1998, Malone's Jazz lost both times to Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls. It is the defining asterisk of his basketball career. All those points, all those MVP trophies, and never a ring.
I'm not bitter. I tip my hat to the Chicago Bulls as a competitor like I am.
There is something almost noble about that framing, or there would be, in a different story. But this is not a different story. This is the actual story. And in the actual story, the grace and self-awareness that Karl Malone shows when talking about losing championship games is deeply, almost painfully, absent from how he has addressed the 1983 incident. Because when the conversation shifts from basketball losses to a 13-year-old girl named Gloria Bell, the composed, philosophical Karl Malone disappears almost entirely. In the rare instances where he has been pressed on the subject, his response has been to retreat, to describe it as a private matter, to claim he has made peace with it, and to move on as quickly as possible. In 2023, when confronted indirectly about the public discourse around his past, Malone stated, "That's my life, it's my personal life, and I'll deal with that like I've had to deal with everything." He deals with it, the way you deal with a pulled muscle, the way you deal with a bad game, not the way someone who understands the gravity of what they did to a child would speak about it. And the NBA, for its part, has been perfectly content to let him deal with it privately while publicly honoring him at every possible opportunity. Nothing made this contradiction more visible than what happened in 2023. The NBA All-Star Weekend was held in Salt Lake City, Utah, Karl Malone's adopted basketball home, and the league chose to invite him to serve as a judge for the slam dunk contest. The decision to allow Malone to serve as a slam dunk contest judge during the 2023 NBA All-Star Weekend in Salt Lake City sparked widespread outrage on social media and renewed calls to ban him from league events entirely. In 2025, something happened that reignited the conversation with a force that even the NBA could not ignore. Victor Wembanyama, the most talked about young player in the league, the consensus generational talent, a man whose opinion carries enormous weight across global basketball culture, reposted a video on his own birthday that explicitly criticized Karl Malone and called for him to be held accountable for what he did. Think about what that means in context. This wasn't a veteran player with a grudge. This was Victor Wembanyama, the face of the NBA's future, on his own birthday, using his platform not to celebrate himself, but to amplify a demand for justice for Gloria Bell. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The new generation of basketball was drawing a line. Social media responses following Wembanyama's repost included calls from fans to have Malone placed under the jail, with users across platforms stating that his NBA honors should be stripped and his presence at league events permanently terminated. The cries for accountability on social media have been consistent, escalating, and impossible to dismiss as fringe opinion. Consider just a sampling of what real people, basketball fans, parents, advocates, have been saying for years. In January 2026, a user on X wrote, "Karl Malone could have been in prison for statutory rape and never had a career." In November 2025, another wrote that Karl Malone only deserves prison time and called him a file. In August of that same year, following the Pat Beverly podcast clip going viral, Karl Malone dead wrong and should have went to prison. And as recently as March 2026, nor do any of them ever protest when the league parades Karl Malone around and he literally a 13-year-old. These are not coordinated bot campaigns. These are real people across years, across platforms, all arriving at the same place independently. The conclusion that something went deeply wrong and that the NBA's silence has made it complicit.
Karl Malone just kind of, when you're having these types of drafts, Karl Malone, what, second leading scorer of all time?
And that's the thing. That's always been the thing. His basketball resume is so overwhelming that it becomes almost a shield, something that people with a vested interest in keeping sports separate from morality can hide behind. Look at the numbers, they say. Look at the championships, the MVPs, the records, as if the numbers have ever once apologized to Gloria Bell.
It's hard to even talk about Karl Malone without having this conversation, you know? It's in the back of my mind every time I think about him.
Even Patrick Beverly, even after his initial shock, even after processing what he'd just heard, couldn't fully separate the player from the act, because that is the intellectual trap that Karl Malone's basketball greatness creates. And it is a trap that the NBA has been exploiting for 40 years.
I didn't even know this. You understand what I'm saying? Like, that's my thing, Ron. I didn't know this at all. So, like...
You never heard this?
No.
He didn't know. And for a long time, a lot of people didn't know. Not because the information wasn't available, but because the sports media ecosystem had collectively decided that Karl Malone's free throw record was more interesting than what he did to a 13-year-old girl in the summer of 1983. And it is not as though the 1983 incident is the only entry in Karl Malone's file of questionable conduct. In 1992, he publicly expressed discomfort with Magic Johnson returning to the NBA after his HIV diagnosis, citing fears about transmission, comments that drew significant backlash for their insensitivity toward a man who was already battling a devastating illness and deserved support, not suspicion. In 2004, during his one season with the Los Angeles Lakers, Malone was accused of making sexually suggestive and racially insensitive comments to Vanessa Bryant, Kobe Bryant's wife, allegedly asking if she liked Mexican girls in reference to her heritage. No charges were filed, but the incident strained his relationship with Kobe and contributed to the dysfunction of that Lakers season. Also in 2004, during the NBA Finals, Malone was accused of poking a fan in the face after the fan allegedly spit on him. The Oakland County prosecutor declined to press charges. In 2021, Malone shared a video on social media falsely linking athlete deaths to COVID-19 vaccines, misinformation that was swiftly criticized and labeled as dangerous conspiracy theory content. No single one of these incidents, taken alone, would be enough to define a legacy, but taken together and placed alongside the gravity of what happened in 1983, they paint a portrait of a man whose relationship with accountability has always been, at best, arm's length. The NBA has not revoked Karl Malone's Hall of Fame status. It has not removed him from the NBA 75th anniversary team. It has issued no public statement addressing the ongoing public outcry over his continued presence at league events. The league has simply chosen silence, the most expensive silence in sports history, paid for not in money, but in moral credibility. And what makes it particularly infuriating is the contrast. The NBA has never had a problem taking swift, public, decisive action when the optics demanded it. Players have been fined for minor uniform violations. Teams have been sanctioned for competitive decisions made during regular season games. The league moves with remarkable speed when it wants to. But when it comes to Karl Malone, when it comes to a Hall of Famer who committed statutory rape under the laws of his own state and built his entire career while that truth sat quietly in the background, the league has chosen to do nothing. Every year, every season, every All-Star weekend, the Karl Malone Award, given annually by the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame to the top college power forward in the country, still bears his name as of the 2025-2026 college basketball season. Young players who have dedicated their lives to the game of basketball aspire to win an award named after a man who impregnated a 13-year-old child. That is the world we are living in. But there is one more piece of this story that we haven't told yet, and it is, in many ways, the most complicated piece. because it involves the people who love Karl Malone, his sons, his family, the people who have had to wake up every morning and navigate a world in which their father is simultaneously celebrated and condemned. In part 3, we are going to talk about what they said, what Demetrius Bell became, what KJ Malone chose to do, and ultimately what goodbye forever really means when the courts won't say it and the league won't say it, and the only verdict that's left is the one history writes. What really happened to Karl Malone? There is something that does not get said often enough in these kinds of stories. In the stories where a powerful man does something unforgivable and the world debates his legacy while the people closest to him try to figure out how to keep living. The children in these stories are not props. They are not plot devices. They are human beings who had no say in any of it, who were born into a situation not of their choosing, who grew up with a father whose name carried both extraordinary achievement and extraordinary shame. Then there is Karl Malone Jr., KJ, the son born to Karl Malone and his wife Kay Kinsey in 1995, the son who grew up inside the version of Karl Malone's life that the world doesn't always see, the devoted husband, the present father, the man who built car dealerships and took his kids hunting and coached them from the sidelines. In May of 2020, a documentary called The Last Dance was airing. It was a celebration of Michael Jordan, but it also necessarily involved the Jazz teams that Jordan beat, and therefore Karl Malone. And as the documentary brought Malone back into the cultural conversation, the backlash against him reignited online with fresh ferocity. People who had forgotten or never known were suddenly confronted with the full story. KJ Malone went on Instagram and posted a video defending his father, a rare, direct, public statement from a member of Malone's immediate family on the subject of the 1983 scandal. Malone's other son, KJ, went on social media to defend his father and family, and what KJ said in that video was striking, not because it was a legal argument, not because it was a denial, but because it was something far more complicated. It was a son's love spoken in real time about a man whose story contains multitudes.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm just doing this for my family and, just standing up for my dad. After, last night's episode of Last Dance, it showed how great of a player my dad is, but people don't want to see that.
That's what KJ was driving toward, and he wasn't wrong, at least not about the impulse. Because yes, the internet in those moments was focused almost entirely on the worst thing Karl Malone ever did. And for a son who grew up watching his father show up, who grew up loved and supported and present, that is a painful thing to watch.
He made a mistake, but at the end of the day, he's still a great dad. He still takes care of Demetrius. Demetrius is my brother.
And then something remarkable happened. KJ, the son of Karl Malone and Kay Kinsey, the son raised in the legitimate family, claimed Demetrius Bell as his brother. Not a half-brother, not a complication. His brother. He said his name. He said his father takes care of him, and he meant it. These things can both be true simultaneously. Karl Malone may genuinely be a loving father today, and Karl Malone committed statutory misconduct in 1983 and faced no criminal consequences. Both are true, and both matter.
My dad's just a country boy. I mean, he still has a damn flip phone. So, I just think me as one of his sons and seeing all this stuff said about him on Twitter.
A flip phone. In an era of Instagram and Twitter and podcasts going viral within hours of posting, Karl Malone, the man at the center of all of this, reportedly still uses a flip phone. He has largely stayed off social media, and in a perverse way, that absence has made everything worse, because it means the story is always being told about him, never by him. In interviews over the years, particularly in an extended conversation in Salt Lake City during All-Star Weekend, Karl Malone has been remarkably candid about certain aspects of his life and career, while remaining almost entirely opaque about others.
Matter of fact, my flaws is probably 20 times worse than other people.
He said that. Karl Malone said that. And when a man of his stature acknowledges openly that his flaws are 20 times worse than other people's, you have to wonder, does he know exactly what he's admitting? Or is that a confession hiding in plain sight, buffered by the kind of Southern gentleman disarming charm that has always been part of his public image?
We're human, right? We all want to be liked, and we want you to grow to love us.
We all want to be liked, and Karl Malone has spent 40 years being liked by Jazz fans, by business partners, by the NBA establishment that has never once moved to revoke his honors. He has cultivated likability with the same discipline he once applied to the weight room, and it has largely worked. So where is Karl Malone today? As of March 2026, he is 62 years old. He lives quietly, splitting his time between Louisiana and Utah with his wife Kay Kinsey, whom he married on Christmas Eve 1990. He owns several car dealerships under the Karl Malone Auto Group, with locations in Utah and Idaho. He also operates Karl Malone Power Sports, selling ATVs, motorcycles, and outdoor equipment. His estimated net worth exceeds $100 million. In February 2026, his car dealership in Bellevue, Idaho, was before the city's Planning and Zoning Commission seeking approval to retain 4 shipping containers on the property for storage. That is the banality of his current existence. Shipping containers, planning commissions, the ordinary machinery of a wealthy man managing his business empire in a mid-sized American city. The Karl Malone Award, given annually to the top college power forward in the country, continues to bear his name, with the 2026 mid-season top 10 list, including players like Graham Ike of Gonzaga, JT Toppin of Texas Tech, and Koa Pete of Arizona. College basketball's best young players still compete for an award named after him every year. Karl Malone has never stolen just a little bit of time. He stole a childhood, he stole a young girl's future, and replaced it with a trauma that no amount of child support can undo. And he spent the next 40 years being celebrated for it. Not for the crime, but despite it, which amounts to the same thing in the end, because the celebration never once paused to acknowledge the cost. The court said nothing. The NBA said nothing. The Hall of Fame said nothing. The award committee said nothing. But the internet never forgets. And in that strange, chaotic, sometimes cruel, and sometimes necessary arena where history gets rewritten in real time, the sentence is being delivered. One post at a time, one viral moment at a time, one Patrick Beverley timeout at a time. What are your thoughts on the life of Karl Malone? Share in the comments and click on the cards on screen for more.